I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today, we are talking about L.A. Confidential, screenplay by Curtis Hanson and Brian Helgeland, based on James Ellroy's 1990 novel, L.A. Confidential, directed by Curtis Hanson. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hush, hush.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
We are here at the finale of our Fall Favorites season. It has been quite a journey. I'm very excited to have this as our season finale for reasons we're going to talk about very soon. But before we dive in, I want to do a quick reminder to everyone that these videos are on YouTube also. So if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe, those things that you do on YouTube. I haven't said that in a while. It's
smash
kind of fun
buttons
to be like,
or whatever.
Yeah, smash that like button and subscribe. Also, a reminder that the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon has a bunch of Patreon exclusive episodes and other perks if you want to join up. So this season, we've talked about Mrs. Doubtfire and Labyrinth and Mulholland Drive. Those are all three movies that we talked about this season.
You're missing out, people.
For our January Patreon exclusive episode, because we do a Patreon exclusive every month, we're going to have a vote. We're asking you, should we talk about Gladiator 2 or Wicked? You can head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon to cast your vote. The link is in the show notes. You don't have to be a patron to cast the vote. Just head over there. And whichever one wins, that's what we're going to talk about. Two very different movies, I think. I haven't seen either. Maybe they're...
Gladiator. Glicked. There's no...
It's in there.
Yeah.
I've heard Glicked.
Yeah. That's not a thing I want to hear.
It's no Barbenheimer, that's for sure.
Yes, so one of those two for January. And on the Patreon, we also post ad-free versions of all the episodes. So if you want to listen to all of the episodes and not just the exclusives ad-free, you can do that on the Patreon. Top-tier patrons also get access to our film club, where every month we hang out with you guys in the film club and talk about a movie. It's usually one that we've talked about on the podcast, but not always. And it's really fun to hear your guys' takes on things and people that have just seen it and different interpretations of stuff. So that's always really fun. There's a lot of cool benefits on the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. And to give you even more value, there's one more thing. Trisha?
Thank you so much, Michael. So this is the part where I talk about my little tiny coverage business that I have, where I read screenplays and I write coverage for people from all around the world, screenwriters in all seasons of their careers. I've had a great year doing it. I've had so many new clients come to me this year. It's been such a blast to see what people are writing. I've even kind of expanded into doing consulting. Some of the projects that I've gotten to work on this year have been in production or even in post-production. And that's also a ton of fun, working on projects at that stage of development. So basically, I would love to help you reach your goals with your project. I have all the information on my website. It's trishaarand.com. Patrons do get a discount. I would strongly advise going ahead and joining the Patreon and getting it. I unfortunately have to raise my rates in 2025 because I haven't raised them since I started my business like 5 years ago or something. So existing clients, if you have more things that you want to send me, get them in now. And if you want to keep getting a discount, then go ahead and subscribe to the Patreon. And I want to see what you're working on. Like, send it over. Let's talk about it. I can't wait to read it.
So yes, there's no reason not to head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon and become a patron. So that's all happening. But right now, we're going to talk about L.A. Confidential. So this was on my favorites of the 90s list. And I love this movie, like, so much. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, and it totally held up for me. I'm a little wary to hear your guys' thoughts because I had this weird thing happen in college where I saw this movie for the first time and I was like, this movie's amazing. I can't wait to show it to like my friends that we all talk about movies and they're going to love it. And they watched it and they were like, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And I was like, wait, what? I have PTSD from showing this movie to people. So I was like hesitant to even put it. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll find out. But this movie is like so tight, so dense. Every scene is doing multiple things at once. It has a great twist. It has really interesting characters, it's sort of a three-hander where you're tracking these three different detectives, and some of the time it feels like their threads are all separate, but how it all comes together is so satisfying and fun. I love this era of Los Angeles where you're getting the Hollywood, but you're also getting the crumbling of the Hollywood and what's going on behind the scenes and the crime and the noir and the detective and just all the stuff. So there's a ton of things I want to talk about in this movie, from the writing to the acting and the execution and all that stuff. But I'm curious to hear from you guys, and I'm curious to hear from you, Alex, because you had not seen this before. So
I had not. To my shame.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
First of all, before I get into that, your story about showing it to your friends and the horrifying reaction reminds me of when I saw the Denis Villeneuve film On Sunday, Incendies at Sundance, and I was like, this is like my new favorite filmmaker. Who is this? Is amazing. And I took a bunch of people to go see it. I'm like, this movie's amazing. And it's about like war trauma and rape and horrible things, and everybody was walking out like shell-shocked and like, what's wrong with you? Who are you? But the filmmaking's so good. Anyway, I feel your pain,
there.
Michael.
It was weird.
Yeah.
Yes, and I feel bad for being part of that party.
It's not a good thing. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah.
But that is not the case with this movie. I loved it. I didn't even like take any notes while I was watching it because I was just like, I got to focus. This movie is so dense and has so much good stuff happening in every scene. I can't have divided attention. So I am kind of winging it in this episode. I wish I had time to see it a second time because there is so much here. And I think I followed everything just barely, but there's so many names and so many plot twists. It's a lot to take in on a first viewing. But I really loved it. It felt like such a great 90s confident like movie, you know. And we've talked about a lot of 90s movies this season because, you know, we are 90s kids in a lot of ways, and a lot of our favorite movies come from this era. But it's like they don't make them like this anymore, you know. There's just something really, really good about this era, you know, these films, and I want to unpack that. You know, what is so entertaining and yet also intelligent, and yet also, you know, just not treating me like a child, treating me like an adult, an intelligent adult who can infer things and put things together in my head. I don't know. There's something going on here where it's like nothing's being sacrificed, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. More happens in this 138 minutes than some entire seasons of streaming shows.
100%.
Yes. Kind of crazy.
I was almost thinking like, man, this almost could be a season of streaming, the amount that happens in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Trisha, tell me about LA Confidential.
Yeah, I really love this movie. I don't remember when I saw it first. I'm sure it was much later than when it came out. You know, I was an adult, I think, but it's such a crystallized, like clearly envisioned, tightly shot, immaculately edited, like really well put together crime detective movie. And, you know, it was kind of from a time when they weren't that in fashion anymore. Like the other big movie of this year, there were lots of others, but the really big one was Titanic, right? So it was like a whole different era and genre and just like approach to filmmaking. This was, you know, like mid-90s, you're doing like big Jurassic Parky kind of like blockbustery stuff, action movies. Independence Day is the biggest movie of the year before this, 1996. This was not what people were making. And it was a relatively small budget movie. You know, it was like a $35 million movie at the time. And it was just like, it so deeply understands itself and like knows what it is and stays like the focus is razor sharp on it. And also like every scene is incredibly sceney. It's just like such a scene. I don't remember the saying about like all you need is 3 good scenes and no bad ones. It's like, or all you need is 50 great scenes
Right.
and no bad ones, which is what LA Confidential is. Now, I will say that as many times as I've seen this movie, this was the first time where I was like, okay, I've got my fingernails dug in. I'm making diagrams. Like, we're going to do the plot, everybody. I'm going to figure it out. Because I truly have never done that before, really. Like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a tradition of all great noir, like, writing. Right? Like, they should be these, like, labyrinthine sort of, like, indecipherable plots where it doesn't even really matter if there are loose ends and kind of thing. But actually, it is a really decipherable plot. if you watch it, because there's a lot of focus in the writing on making it followable. And not just on the plot, but on the character arcs and the characters themselves. Like, I was paying attention this time, and in the first act, everyone's like, hey, bud, this is your thing. Hey, Ed, this is your thing. Hey, Jack, here's who you are. And it's in the dialogue, it's in the action, it's everywhere, so that you understand who they are at the beginning and you understand the journey that they're going on.
It's like the characters are archetypes even within the story world.
Totally. Yes, exactly that. Anyway, I can't celebrate the writing enough and the direction and everything. I just think it's an amazing film, but slippery, a little slippery, because it is so dense. One of our lovely patrons said something on the Discord about, like, my roommate loves this movie because he loves plots. And I just kept thinking about,
there is
if
plot
you love
here.
Plots, if
Much
you love
plot.
this is the very plot movie for you.
Yeah. Yeah, same for, like, this was the first time that I understood what was happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just fascinating that there's some movies where it's like, I don't know what's happening, but I know exactly what's happening. Like, as far as like what I care about.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that twist, I totally feel it. I couldn't explain to you what it means, but I know what it means. And LA Confidential is such that movie. But like you're saying, it does actually check out once you can grasp what's happening.
That really describes my experience watching it, where it's like, yeah, that's really meaningful and impactful. I don't quite know why, but yes.
Yeah. Brian, what about you?
The movie I saw back in, I think, my college days, and loved it then, and watched it a couple times back then, but maybe only like 2 or 3 times. Like, I feel like it's a movie that I feel like I know well, but then I'm like, oh no, I don't remember anything. I remember like the Rollo Tomasi sequence, like through line, is just burned into my brain for the rest of time. But then everything else, I was like, I don't really remember what happens in any of this movie. So it was really, I'd been really looking forward to revisiting it, and definitely a joy to revisit. You know, the opening is really fun and energetic. And I think there was maybe in the middle, I never was like falling off of it or disliking it or anything like that. I think there was just a moment where I was just kind of like, this is not feeling as like masterpiecey to me as it is some of the other times. And then just the finale is like the best thing ever. You know, like once you get into kind of buddy cop mode and then you go into the end, it's just like, oh yeah, that's what the rest of this movie gets you, you know? And I like all the other scenes too. But I felt like there was a little bit of a moment where I was just kind of like, okay, I'm just watching the movie now to watch the movie. And then by the end, I was like, I'm so glad I watched all that movie, because then we got here. Also, it was my first time watching it since moving to LA. And I realized that I live 2 blocks from Mrs. Lefferts' house right down the street, which explains the smell. So that's always fun. And when they're talking to like the boxer in the front yard, behind them you can see Bob's Market, which is also near me, but apparently it's like the market from the Fast and the Furious franchise, which is a thing I would know if I had seen any of those movies ever. So yeah, I live near some stuff, which is fun.
This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. And with Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected so you can explore the best of cinema streaming anytime, anywhere. If you like podcasts, which I assume you do because you're listening to this, then I want to recommend the Mubi podcast, which is on its 7th season, and the theme of this season is box office poison. As Hollywood runs for cover beneath a hail of high-profile, big-budget box office flops, the award-winning Movie podcast returns to remind us that today's failures could be tomorrow's classics. Season 7 tells the story of 6 films that were notorious financial disasters, but have come to be celebrated as visionary. Based on the new book of the same name by Tim Robey, film critic for UK paper The Telegraph, host Rico Gagliano uses Roby's research and insights as a springboard to tell the wild stories of these films' rise, fall, and rise. Films covered include Sorcerer, Babe, Pig in the City, Sylvia Scarlett, The Hudsucker Proxy, Schenectady, New York, and Speed Racer. Guests this season include none other than Roger Deakins, James Cromwell, legendary screenwriter Wayland Green, special effects pioneer John Gaeta, who worked on The Matrix, critic and podcaster Karina Longworth, Rebecca Hall, who starred in one of my favorite movies, The Prestige, UK comic genius Jamie Demetriou, and Tim Robey himself. You can find the Movie Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to stream great films, you can try Mubi for free for 30 days at mubi.com/beyond the screenplay. That's mubi.com/beyond the screenplay for a whole month of great cinema for free. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay. Nice. It was fun moving to LA and realizing I lived nearby where like they do the Hollywood premiere. There's a very distinct building in the background on Hollywood Boulevard that I believe is David Fincher's office, or at least it was for a period of time. So there's a lot of fun LA stuff. If you come to LA, you'll spot some things.
Or if you're just an LA nerd.
Yeah, so many things to talk about in this movie. I read that Curtis Hanson was drawn to, I believe that's what I read, the characters more than the plot. And I think that's really interesting because, as I was saying, there are these three characters at the center of this: Ed Exley, Bud White, Jack Vincennes. And tracking them is just really fun. And the design of each of them at different points in the movie, I'm like, I'm on your side. I like you. And then later I'll be like, no, you're a dick. I don't think I do like you. Each of them has this complexity. Their thing, as you were saying, Trisha, is very clear. Like, people are like, Bud, you like to save women, don't you? Like,
and punch men in the face.
Many times people tell him that.
Yeah. And so you get a really good sense of what each of them represents in this world, like what they mean as a member of the LAPD at this time. So you can track the shifts of what happens to them as a statement of meaning, which is what's ideally happening in a story and characters. And I just love how they kind of come together and then like separate and in and out, and then it culminates, at the outset or early on, Exley and Bud hate each other, and you're like, oh, this is bad. And I love this movie. By the end, it's like, and they have to team up to work together. Like, this movie has like the range to do all of that. And I want to talk about the midpoint also when we kind of get there, because it does a cool reset thing. It sets the board in a new way and teases up for the second half of the character arcs. But in general, these three characters, I just love how they're rendered. And I can't think of that many movies that have what feel like three main characters, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The three-hander is really interesting and clever in the way that it's set up. And I just really respect the hell out of the opening sequence for that reason, where like you have the Danny DeVito character essentially doing voiceover, kind of introducing himself, also the world, right? And then we kind of get into this Christmas. It's a great Christmas movie. I'm so happy we're talking about it this month. The Bloody Christmas, like, sort of series of events that unfold. And they really just kind of go straight for the, like, we're going to be as clear as we possibly can be for the audience here. Like, we're going to put the name up on screen. Here's a freeze frame. Like, this is who this person is, essentially. And they show them in the most, like, here's their thing type of way, right? We meet Bud. He is going to like drag a wife beater out of his house and kick his ass. And then in like a not,
subtle.
Well, I was going to say like police standard kind of way, right? Like he's kind of operating outside of like what he should be doing as a police officer, but he's doing it for like this moral code of his own. And then like, we see the violent impulse there, right? It's those two things together. And then here's Jack. He's this smarmy guy. He just cares about being on TV and being famous. And he's working with Danny DeVito's character. And like, here's his whole thing. And then here's Edmund Exley, and he's being interviewed by like reporters who are there. And they're like, so your father was a famous cop, and would you do, and then like minutes later, the police chief is like, would you do this? Would you do this? Would you do this immoral thing? He's like, no, I would not. And that's because I'm a golden boy. And by the way, everybody lose your glasses. Like, it just is all just like, it happens so densely for each of the characters so early on that the movie is doing virtually nothing. Although if it actually is doing an amazing like plot expository thing also. But it feels like it's so hyper-focused on the characters so we can kind of get who each of them is in like the smallest and quickest way possible. And then it really goes hard on it. There's nothing like light touch about it. It's like, you're going to need this now because there's so much plot that's about to happen. So unless you're keyed into these characters, you will not be able to ride along with the rest of it. And that's just, I don't know. It's just good, smart writing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very clear. It's like you've got these three cops. Each one has their thing. There's the bruiser, there's the celebrity, there's the schoolboy, you know. But then I also like, as you touched on there, how quickly it also shows you that they're not just two-dimensional. It could be very easy to be like, here's the bruiser. He's going to, over the course of 2.5 hours, learn to have a heart of gold. Here's the schoolboy. Over 2.5 hours, he's going to learn to be corrupt and whatever. But instead, it's like they're both already fully well-drawn characters, right? Like Bud is sensitive and he does care about other people. And Ed is, as we see very quickly, willing to maybe make some exceptions to his rules to get kind of what he wants or what he thinks he wants. And then even Jack is more of a one-note character, but then at times it's like, oh, he's more scary than we thought, but then also kind of gets a bit of like a little redemption moment at the end of his arc in the movie. And I really appreciate that because I think there is a cool way to do this movie where everyone is kind of staunchly who they are until they're slowly pulled into other directions. But I think that for how much is going on in this movie, I really like that they are more well-rounded than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
From pretty early on, Ed Exley could have been just like, this is just the good guy character amidst all of the corruption and badness. But there's something about him that is kind of unlikable in the way he's going about his good guyness.
Right.
Like immediately it's like, there's something, I don't like how you're doing your hero thing. It doesn't feel totally authentic or coming from the right place. And so, yeah, there's no character that is one-dimensionally the good guy here. In some ways, Bud has more heart than the Ed Exley character. Mm-hmm. And I like that a lot.
Well, and I think, not to jump too quickly to theme, but the theme of the movie is a fairly complicated question, which to my mind is essentially, is it possible to be a moral police officer? And that's pretty complicated, right? There's like systems in place. There's like people who are playing ball. There's like all of this stuff that's happening in the city, right? Like different kinds of like vices and crime and all of this stuff that they have to navigate. And so like to get justice for the Night Owl murders, there's all these other things that are also happening, right? Like the Mickey Cohen thing is here and there's this and there's that. Because it's like sort of a really complicated question, it's smart to have three different characters wrestling with it directly in their own experience, right? Like each of them actually is, maybe not Jack, but like each of them, for the most part, is sort of wondering about who they are, right? Like, where is the corruption? Is it possible to fight it if it's in me, if it's out there, if it's literally everywhere? And so what's the like smartest thing that I can do? What's the like best way to live, right? Which is what morality is about. And so I think having multiple characters that are directly addressing the thematic question in their character arcs, that's the way to go. Like you could do this with one protagonist. You could, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. So having three characters from totally different sort of like worlds and standpoints at the beginning, grappling with it, creates this like layered weight to the theme.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you called that out, Brian, the three-dimensionality. We see this contradiction in each of them pretty quickly. Not as much Jack, who is sort of like not quite supporting character, but he doesn't make it to the end, right? Like it's ultimately about Ed and Bud, and Jack is there too, but has less of an arc. But we see, when they bring in the killers, right? Like the Mexicans, we got to go throw them it's time to go beat people because it's fun and it's Christmas. Everybody's reactions to that is characterization, right? So Ed is trying to stop it and like calm everyone down. That's making me empathize with him. Like he's trying to like do something good. Bud goes to try to pull his partner off of the people. So like we're seeing Bud has, recognizes that this is not the right way. But when someone calls him a name, then Bud punches him back, right? So we're immediately seeing that this tension like, right, the third dimension there. And then the following scene is Ed willing to rat on everybody, right? And so it's that smarminess. We're seeing that contradiction whiplash happen super fast. And I just love, again, how fast and efficient this movie does all that. The other thing I want to say about the characters is that the names are all very distinct. And I feel like that helps you track a little bit, or at least know who we're talking about, right? Like Sue Lefferts and Buzz Meeks and all these kind of like, Lynn Bracken. I feel like that helps you understand who people are talking about, or at least know who they're not talking about. And that all of these people are getting set up while all this other stuff is happening, right? We're meeting Bud's partner, who's a key player, and what the revelation is. We meet Buzz Meeks, who ends up being an important thing. So in this first 10 minutes, there's so much setup happening for so much stuff all at the same time, and you can track it. And it's just extremely impressive writing and directing and editing to make sure that all that information is conveyed while keeping things moving and being fun. So just the beginning of this movie is amazing and has so much momentum. I kind of want to jump to the midpoint, because the other thing that I love about this movie is how twisty it is, and it has a really good false victory midpoint where it seems like they've solved the murder and people are getting awards and you're sleeping with your lady and everybody's happy, everything's great, right? But the movie manages to still have this kind of undercurrent of but something isn't quite right. And I feel like it's rare for movies to achieve a really good false victory where I'm sort of okay, yeah, I think I feel satisfied, this is good, but something is nagging at me also. And I just, this is one of the movies that stands out to me as pulling off a really good false victory midpoint that leaves you being but there's something not right. And in that period, lets the movie set up the dominoes that are going to start falling for the second half.
Well, and again, I love that all of the action that takes place in this movie is doing thematic and character work, right? So the exact way that the midpoint sequence unfolds is crucial to reading the character's journey. So we see, what happens with Exley's character, and we know that he doesn't want to plant evidence, or he doesn't want to shoot anybody that isn't, an immediate threat to him, and all the sort of police officer rule book things. And then we see that he's not able to adhere to that code in the confrontation, right? There are actually kind of two confrontations, but that it doesn't go that way, right? And so we also see the way that Bud acts in that scenario, and then the climactic thing where he's in the second firefight and then he has to chase the guy down the hall, and he puts his gun through the elevator doors and just fires without knowing really who's in there. It's just and the look on his face when he realizes that is what he has done in the heat of the moment. Action sequences are at their best when they are being used to put pressure on the characters to reveal their true selves, like everything else that a movie should be doing. But action sequences are super capable of that as well. And again, here, just the exact way that it unfolds is focused on revealing character for everybody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that Ed Exley sequence down the hall of the elevator is that's a great example of, and even when the guy's running out and it's we've already heard, Smith say would you shoot a guy in the back, et cetera, right? Where then it's you as the audience, if it's done well, you as the audience is not going, you're not going, are they going to get the bad guy? You're going, ooh, is this character going to do a thing they said they'd never do? And how exciting is that when a sequence can pull that off, where instead of just wondering, are you going to get the bad guy? You're going, ooh, I'm actually as, if not more excited about character thematic stuff as I am in just action stuff. And yeah, I totally felt that this time.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought the interrogation scenes were really well done following that sequence. And the movie, once again, it's kind of complex enough and trusts our intelligence enough to have us in this gray area where these men they've captured have done something horrific. I mean, they rescued this woman.
They're not good dudes.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like, so it's, I think a lesser movie would be like, these purely innocent people, look how awful it is that they're captured. It's like, no, it's like these people should be arrested, but are they the guys that killed those people at the Night Owl? That's the question mark. But I love how, there's complexity in all of it. And, the victim of their crimes, she wants them to go to jail. And so that she has a reason to say, oh yeah, they were gone at that hour of the Night Owl killings. And I think there's a realism and integrity in that whole midpoint plot development that isn't just a simple, they planted the evidence and they got these totally innocent people, and it's like cops really bad and these people really good, and it's all, clean. It's very messy, very gray, and the whole movie feels that way in a really satisfying way.
Well, it's doing theme to what you were saying earlier, Trisha, right? Like if your point is to say how is it possible to be a moral cop, right? Or to have, morality in our justice system, then if the people that you're dealing with are just good people, that's not hard. That's a very simple thing to navigate. And so, everybody in this movie has some sort of moral compromise and moral corruption with different, amplitudes. But that's what makes this so hard to navigate, and also why every scene has meaning and is saying something, because everybody represents this, the La La Land corruption noir thing. It's just, it's so good. That's movie.
Well, and it's a stroke of brilliance to make Kim Basinger's character a part of all of this, right? She's already wrapped up in not just the plot complications, but the thematic question, right? The way that she is portrayed, she's a sex worker, and you get this sense of some of the other people that work for Pierce Patchett and his whole, fleur-de-lis, whatever thing, that there's maybe some real, I don't know, I guess I'm looking for coercion there, or less than consent or choice, right, from the people who are working for him. But with her, it's complicated. Is this the line of work she came out here to get into? No. But at the same time, it feels like they make the distinction that because she actually didn't undergo any plastic surgery, that somehow there's a purity to her. That kind of becomes a symbol of she's I'm naturally a brunette, but the rest is me. There's kind of this idea of they use the slang, you've been cut to look like this or cut to look like that. And it's no, she wasn't. There is some degree of choice here. And even in her interactions with Bud, he kind of has made a moral distinction for himself, where he's they only get Veronica Lake, I get to know Lynn Bracken. And so there's this kind of thing. But then, of course, even that is pushed to complication when Ed Exley comes in and what's really going on in that scene. And all of that, of course, turns out to be a setup, but we don't know that at the, in the moment and all this stuff. And so having her, again, the character design is also driving at theme from her angle about corruption and where your own personal moral boundaries are, and what can you stomach and what can you not, and in the face of the world being what it is.
Yeah, her role in this is really interesting, because in some ways it's small in terms of real estate, but I feel like it's a place that we need to be able to go to, and is a little bit of a respite almost from the moral ambiguity. And I don't know, just something about there's a sweetness there that does develop between her and Bud that I feel like becomes the heart of the movie, and is how we start to really root for Bud, and not just as a plot wise solving the murders, but as a person. I want I want you to be okay. I want you guys to be okay. And I think having that heart to root for is important to have also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that she, in a movie where sort of the point of the characters is they're morally ambiguous, and any character, like right up until the finale, any character could make a choice that's like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not rooting for you anymore. She does feel like the beating heart of this movie, which then is also why it's brilliant to have her and the Ed Exley moment feel like it's like, oh, now the heart, right? It's like when the headquarters gets attacked by the bad guys or whatever, right? It's like now the one thing we could count on, we're not sure if we can count on anymore.
Well, then the way it pushes Bud to his crisis, where it's like, go all the way with your characters. Don't half-ass it. Like, what's the worst possible thing that could happen to Bud? He becomes his father. He becomes the thing that he hates in other people. And what situation could drive him to that dark place is this exact situation with Ed, with these photos. So I think it's just really smart writing to concoct that scenario to bring Bud to that really dark place at that point in the movie.
I just want to quickly shout out to people who write plot summaries on Wikipedia, because I was thinking about this as I was watching it. I was like, how would I even start? Like, really? How do I write a plot summary of this that isn't 10 pages long? Like, to be honest. And so I went and I read the Wikipedia article plot summary, and they just tell you up front. They're like, here's Bud. He's violent, but he mostly, is violent against people who beat women because his father murdered his mother. And you're like, oh, cool. Thank you for telling me that in the first paragraph of the plot summary of Wikipedia. No, but it is just the way to do it, right? In a summary, I feel like the way that it's revealed in the movie is actually one of the things that I really admire. It's, this intimate moment. They're just lying in bed and he's talking, and she just asked him about a scar. And he says, about 4 sentences, which are possibly the worst 4 sentences anybody's ever uttered.
It's pretty horrific.
It's the worst story anybody could tell. It's truly wild. But it snaps everything into really sharp focus. And so I think in a certain kind of movie, having a childhood memory that explains your whole thing is kind of a cheap way to do it. I think it's really wise to use it here as a plot device, because his whole thing is fairly complicated. His whole thing is that he's a violent person, but not against women. And he's especially violent towards men who are violent towards women. That's kind of a complicated character type. And so to be able to just explain it in about 4 sentences, it has to be compelling, but we kind of need that, because it's really layered, especially because for a lot of the middle section of this movie, Bud is just beating up wannabe Mickey Cohens. And that's what the chief is kind of using him for, right? As just a muscle for hire. And so having it what Bud actually cares about, and it's in the same, I think, scene where he says I used to being a cop, and now I don't it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And it's because what he's doing doesn't communicate anything to him about why he got started doing this. And so, I just think it's not always the right call in terms of here's a character motivation monologue in the middle of the movie. But I think here it definitely is.
Yeah, I was thinking about there's the sort of rule of screenwriting that between any 2 scenes, you should be able to put the word but or so. I forget exactly what it is, but it's as a result of this, then this happens,
therefore,
right?
I think is the South Park ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So, or this happens, but then this happens. So then now they have to go. And remember Night Country? Where,
what?
I think one of those episodes, episode 4 or 5, who knows? Because it just kept going. We read, I literally read a paragraph of the Wikipedia article, and it was just this thing happens, also this thing happens, also this thing happens, also this thing happens.
Yeah.
And it's I hadn't thought about it before, or maybe I did mention it then, but as you point out, Trisha, it's because the things in this movie feel like they're all connected. It's you can write a Wikipedia article that's, 40 sentences or something, and be because this, then this, but this. And it feels once you have all that stuff, you're not going to have all of this clue sent them over here, and then they talk to this guy and all that kind of stuff. But the big picture stuff feels like it's all very fluid, which is really impressive in a movie like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and I think it helps to know your bad guy's plan. I definitely do not get the sense that the writer was like, oh, this would be cool, and then this would be cool, and then in the end, it'll all have been on purpose. Like the James Cromwell character from the beginning is enacting this plan. Watching it again, I was like, oh, they almost tell it to you. Once you know what's going on, it's like it's pretty obvious, but there's so much going on the first 5 times that it's actually pretty opaque. I also love that the plan is using the characters' things against them, right? So like Captain Dudley Smith is manipulating Exley and Bud such that Bud will find out that Exley slept with Lynn, and so Bud is gonna go and kill Exley. Like, so there's plot stuff happening,
And then once Danny DeVito's done his part, then he doesn't need to be around anymore, like all that. Yeah.
right? And so it's just cool that the bad guy is also using the characters' arcs against them and like weaponizing it. So again, it's not just plot happening, but character development. And Bud is there and like could kill Exley, and this is the final showdown fight that like we might have been expecting, but because of what gets revealed, and I love that he throws the chair out the window, but also part of I think why his backstory needs to be so extreme is that some of his actions are pretty extreme. Like during the interrogation, where as soon as like one of the people that's brought in is like talking about like hurting a woman, he like you see his hands start to like grasp it, and then he just snaps the chair. Right. He like there's several like Hulk out moments.
Turn into the Hulk.
Yeah.
He's not even surprised he snaps the chair. He just does it and then goes, sorry, Alex, what'd you say?
Oh, just when he hangs the D out the window. Just like there's these scenes go really far. It's like you're gonna literally do the thing, hanging you out the window.
I like that the bad guy's plan is smart and thought through and is designed such that it's going to put pressure on the characters to confront things they don't want to confront. And that's what the antagonist is supposed to do. It's kind of like the Joker, right? The Joker is going to send Batman to confront things that Batman's not willing to do. And so then what are you going to do, Batman?
Rachel.
You're gonna growl Rachel.
Something we talked about recently, Michael, was just like it's really nice when characters are smart and do the smart thing that one would do if you were smart, and it's especially annoying when bad guys don't do the smart thing, because you want the bad guys to be formidable opponents, but when they kind of like conveniently, I don't know, just like, tell you their plan because it's like the bad guy speech time, or it's like they could just kill you right now, but they're going to wait a little bit.
They're going to leave the room while the laser slowly goes.
Yeah, like I really like, I like that it's like as soon as Danny DeVito has like finished his role, it's like, you're dead now. It's like, we're not going to wait until later and give you an opportunity to get out or spread the word or whatever. No, you're going to die now. And it makes it feel like the stakes are so much higher when there's not that safety net of bad guy who will not do the smart thing, but will actually do the plot enabling thing.
And we've said a few times now that this movie is very intelligent. And that was something that critics said a lot at the time, like that this movie feels grown up and intelligent and it doesn't insult you, partially because it's a complicated puzzle, right? So what they mean by that is this is not a 20-piece puzzle, it's a 1,000-piece puzzle. And so like you're going to have to, put in some work to watch it in some ways. But at the same time, all the things that I've called out about like, it's really clear in the text who the characters are. It's really clear in every single scene, like what the moving pieces are, like what the goal is from here to there. The dialogue is really clear about like, what do you really care about, character? Tell it to me in the dialogue. Like, tell me what you think about the theme. And there are ways that it's forcing that, right? Forcing conversations about the theme, forcing conversations about character. And I just want to say that like, that's also intelligent to do. Like, I feel like as screenwriters, sometimes we shy away because we don't want the like on the nose dialogue. We don't want the on the nose thematic scene where the audience is rolling their eyes. But when you have a thematic question as complicated as this one, put it in the words. Like, it's a complicated question. You're not going to solve it just by having your characters talk about it. but have them talk about it, direct our attention to it, and have them address it from their various points of view. It's actually making the dialogue more interesting to listen to, and it's helping us understand why we're watching this movie. And so even if you can't put together the 1,000 pieces of the plot puzzle, you're still getting a clear thematic picture at the end when it all snaps together.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's why the movie is satisfying, even if you don't follow every intricate, name that's being spoken. Because so many of the themes are thematic in nature, it's still satisfying. And yeah, I think about, the fear of being too on the nose or having characters talk too openly about these thematic questions. And the opposite can happen where it's like you have a movie that's like gritty, realistic movie where people like just kind of mumble things at each other and barely speak. And it's all internal. It's like, well, but now I have no access to this internal world. And I need some access because I don't know what the hell your movie's about. And it's like, that was real darn realistic and gritty and cold and hard to watch. And I don't think I ever need to watch it again.
What movie are you talking about, Alex?
A lot of movies. A lot of movies at film festivals, Like it just feels like, no, like you're saying, Trisha, it's okay to put the theme out there front and center because that is why I'm here.
It's also conflict. Like,
yes,
right.
When I know what Ed Exley stands for and represents, and when I know what Bud stands for and represents, then in a scene with the two of them, there's immediately tension because they represent opposing things. There's going to be, and so, they can talk about what flavor of coffee they want, but I know that every word, every back and forth, and how the scene concludes, who wins the scene, is going to be a point in the meaning column of this or that. And so, I think both the idea of making sure your theme is present and part of the story and the plot and the conflict, and as you were saying, Alex, like making the antagonist smart and actually difficult to beat are these kind of weird things that I think writers can trick themselves into being like, the smart way to do it is to, not be obvious with it, or, ha ha ha, like the laser thing. Yeah, bad guy speeches. I know that's bad. I'm not going to do that. And it almost, I think, creates this false sense of security where I think it's actually much harder to make a really smart bad guy. It's hard to write that story, but it's so much better. And it's hard to have such a grasp on the meaning of your story that you can put it in every single scene. But like that hard work is what makes the final thing meaningful and better. And so I think it's easy to trick ourselves as writers into, I don't want to do that cliche thing, not realizing that what you're actually avoiding is the thing that makes the story special.
Right.
And I want to say, I have not read the novel, to my own embarrassment, although I'm planning to read it because I loved my rewatch of this movie so much. But I was reading that there are at least 5 more subplots in the novel. Like, for a movie as already complicated as this, that there was like that much more in the novel. And again, just going, underscoring the point that you just made, Michael, that is the way to do it. Like, read the whole book. If you're doing an adaptation, right? Read the whole book, figure out what it's about, and then, just carve away anything that's not that. Like, and I think there were several more characters that are not even in this movie that were in the novel, but they focused on these 3. These are the 3 different like points in the thematic conversation that we want to like bring in. And then anything that has nothing to do with their character arcs. I think I was reading too that they wanted to, they cut any scene that didn't have any of the 3 main characters in it. Like, so the POV is really, except maybe, I guess, scenes maybe where Danny DeVito is like typing to himself in his office or something.
But he's us.
Sure, he is. But that's just another really smart like design thing where it's just like, stay focused on these guys. It's enough. It's actually, for a lot of people, probably going to be too much for them to like really track. And then everything else just doesn't belong here. We
got to talk about the finale.
We must. We must.
Let us talk about the finale.
I just think it's like, it's almost corny in how it does what it does, which is like, these guys who hate each other, they hate each other more than ever now. But wait a minute, Martha, like, let's, like, we're teaming up now, right? But then it's like, once they team up, I'm just like, hell yeah. They're like tossing guns to each other and they're breaking down doors. And I'm just like, how do you get this fun out of a movie that doesn't feel like that? Which also reminds me of the beginning of the movie, where it is that kind of like fun, energetic montage, which a lot of this movie doesn't have. And then you just bring it back before you get to the both fun and dark finale, like the last scene. Just that run up to it has such an energy to it, and you've got these two characters who have hated each other this whole time and are now working together, and it's like, part of me wishes there was more of that in the movie, and then part of me is like, no, but then the ending isn't as exciting as it is, because you have to earn it. You have to work your way up to that moment.
They kill so many people.
They do kill a lot of people. Just a lot of red shirts that are just
so many red
wandering
shirts.
around outside. I think it's like you're saying, Brian, it's the run up to the finale that like earns, like, part of me watching this time was like, yeah, this is kind of corny and silly. You're just going to have a big shootout. But like, yes, like that's what I want at this point in the movie, because there is this great reveal that James Cromwell is the bad guy, right? And that's in the kitchen scene where Jack goes, to your point, Alex, about the bad guy doing the smart thing immediately. As soon as Jack is like, I've discovered this important thing and I haven't told anyone yet, bang, he's dead. Yeah. Right. And so it makes perfect sense. It's underlining how like sharp and smart this antagonist is while revealing it. We get the Rollo Tomassi setup. So like that's out there. Like it feels like just everything is, the pressure's building and there's going to be no escape, but there's just these little threads to hang on to. And so when these two, Ed and Bud, finally do manage to wade through all of the things that are being put on them and find the truth, it is this exciting, like, oh my God, they did it, and they did it together. And then the movie uses that momentum to like off to the races, investigate that loose end's tied up. Pierce Patchett is dead, which is sad. I like David Stewart. He's really good.
He's great.
It really earns it and builds up that momentum so that by the end, I am ready for an action finale, which is kind of maybe not what I would have expected from a lot of the movie. But in that moment, it's like, yeah, no, the last thing to do is to just shoot it out.
Yeah, and I think there is something, that's another kind of restraint that the movie has, which is you could have shootouts the whole way through, in which case the end, or characters dying left and right, which they do, but not characters that we are really familiar with. And then it's not until Jack dies and then that finale where it's like, oh man, I didn't know this movie was going to go to these places, which makes it more exciting than if the movie had just gone to those places the whole time.
I must mention the oil fields. I mean, symbolically, there's no better place to set this finale, and like you get the oil derricks and everything. I know they're from the novel, but again, like you can just put symbols, like they're in the background. It's not like they have anything to do with the scene, but symbolically they represent corruption and capitalism, turning death into money. That's literally what the oil business is. And just having the oil derricks there, and it's real, LA was an oil city for a long time. And the derricks are real too. In the movie, they shot them, at an oil field here in Los Angeles.
Which was very confusing for me, before I moved to LA. I was like, why is there all this oil in this Los Angeles? This doesn't make sense. But when you're here driving and it's like, oh yeah, there it is. And then you watch There Will Be Blood and it all makes sense.
Is that one area kind of like in West LA, or that you get in the freeway, it's like, wait, there's just oil derricks still here in the middle of the city. What the hell?
Yeah.
And they're a staple of noir literature that's set in Los Angeles, especially when, Raymond Chandler and all those guys were writing, because that was like peak oil business time in LA. But anyway, so they're doing like a world thing, but also they're doing a thematic scene thing as a symbol. So I love that. But then, yeah, also, again, it's all theme in the action, because the big shootout is not with the like supposed enemy out there. It's your own police force. These are your own guys, your own chief, right? Like, is it possible to be a moral police officer? I have no idea, when they're all just trying to kill you, like in this massive shootout. And then of course down to like the final, like, hold up your badge, lad, so they know you're a police officer. It's just all perfectly constructed to be about the thing the movie's about.
Yeah, I really liked that that line that I hadn't really thought about before, but this time I was like, oh, theme. Oh, there you are. Like right in the center of like, yeah, who gets to hold up the badge and represent the policeman in this movie, and the ambiguousness of like, I have to shoot my captain in the back because he's the bad guy, and that's justice, and that's what it means to be a policeman, apparently, in this world. And so I loved all that and clocked all of that much more this time. And it's just a really fun action sequence, too. Like, all the action sequences are really well done and are fun to watch and choreographed in an interesting way. And, like, the Bud gets, like, shot a lot. Like, he should probably be dead.
Yeah, I thought he was definitely dead.
Yeah, like, he gets shot in the face.
I've seen the movie a couple times, and I thought he was definitely dead.
Same.
But it is kind of it pulls off as much of a happy ending, I feel like, as this movie can get, with the reveal of him, and he and Lynn are going to go off to Arizona and live happily ever after. Maybe he can't speak anymore, but he can nod and shake hands with Ed. And the way this movie wraps up just feels satisfying. Doesn't spend too much time after the shootout. It's sort of like, everybody gets their medals, and it's, life goes on, and politics are going to be what they are. But like, there's a little bit of a victory here too.
I also think it's really crucial, the small scene that's between the shootout and the like medal scene, where you see Ed kind of posturing himself as like, I'm going to tell the again, the like contradiction in the character. I'm going to tell the absolute truth to all of you about everything that happened, right? Like, here's what was going on. Here's the entire backstory of the blackmail plot and this and that, all the murders that have happened. Dudley orchestrated all of this and that and everything. And I shot him, right? Like, he also tells the truth about shooting Dudley in the back. But also, you're going to need me to like emerge as being the face of this thing. And it again presents what is essentially corruption, right? Like, he is not going to tell the truth to the public. The public is not going to know about Dudley being who he was. They're still going to paper over the depth of what was really happening to the outward facing, right? So it's just like, it again is kind of holding these things in tension. And so I just really appreciate, and it's the fact that it's done on like the two sides of the mirror, right? Like the one-way mirror kind of thing. It's,
It is very The Dark Knight there too, with the kind of like, what does Gotham deserve? They need their knight in shining armor, even though it's all very dark and corrupt.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what lessons are we going to take away from LA Confidential? Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. I've talked before many times about how movies that are have this many things in them can really push me off. We've talked several times during this episode about the different things that are keeping us hooked. Trisha, you talked about just the character archetypes being like, here's who they are, here's their thing, you get it, right? And then the other thing that I didn't remember about this movie, but I thought was really smart, is just that it's all focused on one case. So we're just going to keep coming back to this, and everything is like, oh, that's that person, the person that we saw outside the liquor store on that night. And that's that person, the person who was here, and it's always like, literally, we're going to show you a flashback of their face so you remember who that person is. We're going to say like a line of dialogue. And I never am upset when movies do that, because I'm like, thank you, gotcha. And it was almost to the point where about halfway through the movie, I was like, is this too small in scale? Like, that we're only keeping it to one case? Because it almost feels like it's like another day at the office for these guys, right? But then, of course, you zoom out and it's like, oh no, that case then uncovers this conspiracy that's been going on for years and years and years. And you zoom out more and it's like literally every single person in this movie their life is going to be changed forever as a result of this one case, right? But you just have this focal point, this anchor that is just pulling everything together. And then, of course, the other thing, as we've also talked about, is the character stuff, which is there's a love interest, right? So like, that is interesting. And then now she maybe is in danger, and that's interesting. Now maybe she's unfaithful, and that, like, now we're reaching for our popcorn, right? Because we're like, what's going on with this thing? And I think that, like, so you have these two, it's like, lesson-wise, if you're writing a story that has a lot of moving pieces, it's like, look for some story anchors to keep us oriented, right? Like, here's this one case, here's this one thing we're trying to solve. All of these tenuous tendril kind of things are all coming back to that center point at one way. And then also look for that just character stuff, whether it's character arcs, theme, love interest, all that kind of that stuff that just makes us go, ooh, I know what the thing is with you. I know what the thing is I'm rooting for you. Or the thing that I'm waiting to see, is that going to happen? Is this character going to break in this kind of way? Are these people going to get together? Is this person going to find out about this? Just that like almost soapy stuff sometimes, right? And I feel like if you have like that kind of plot anchor and that character and thematic anchor, then you can go to a lot of places as long as you never stray too far from those kind of central things. And I think this movie is an excellent example of that.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, and the metaphor of like, yeah, when you're reaching for popcorn, it's the like, oh, what's going to happen next feeling. And so what are the things you have in your movie that are going to make people want to know what's going to happen next? That's what movies should be. That's what shows should be. Sometimes there is this guy going to have another bad breakfast with his mother in
with the blue milk.
Imperial, with blue milk.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like the last scene that we saw where nothing like that's what's going to happen? Yeah. Popcorn. Anyway, sorry. I lost my train of thought. Alex, what's your lesson?
Just to follow up on what you were saying there, I think also the thing that I want always is, I have enough information that I am theorizing about what's going to happen next. I am trying to predict the plot. And so that when the plot, doesn't go that way, has a surprise, I've like made up a story that's been subverted. That's where like the real joy comes from. But if I don't have enough information to make up the next part of the plot, then I'm just not in that stream of engagement. Right. And so, yeah, the real magic comes, I think, from where it's like, you've crafted a compelling enough narrative and giving me the information I need and the questions I need to be like trying to precog the plot. And then you screw with my prediction and I'm delighted.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my partner never seen this movie, so we watched it together, and it was cool to hear her be like, oh, these guys in the interrogation scene were clearly set up, or just kind of always feel like there's enough there for her to try to be one step ahead of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably just a good exercise. Like, think about what should the audience be yelling at the screen at any given moment, and if it's nothing, then maybe you need more happening.
I love that.
Right. Yeah. But my lesson, we've already talked about it a bit, but just the one note I wrote down before I got locked into the movie was Russell Crowe's opening scene is so good. The introduction to this character of Bud White was so good, and I think, I'm referring to the scene where he goes and arrests the guy who's beating his wife, and I think it's the staging of that scene and the kind of real timeness of that scene allows us to really just watch this character like go through an entire process, and it's kind of establishing his thing. This is almost like a routine for him where he notices, oh, that guy's yelling at his wife. We're not supposed to be here. We're supposed to go back or whatever. But hold on, I'm going to do something. And it seems like the way his partner is reacting suggests like, oh, this is a thing he does. This is a routine. And then to see the routine play out all the way through, kind of like, I think he like calls it in or something. It's just like, yeah, you'll find this guy over here. And, the way the exchange he has with the woman as she's leaving, it's just a wonderful, like real-time scene to introduce a really specific character. And when those scenes are well done in movies, they're just so compelling because there's this new person you're being introduced to. There's a really intense situation they've been thrown into, and their behavior and their choices in the situation are really interesting and surprising and tell you so much about them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also the haircut. No, I just the production and hair makeup design, like all of it's incredible. But also like Russell Crowe's haircut in this movie tells me everything I need to know about Bud White, right? Like this really short and military buzz cut almost. And just the way that he like carries himself with that. And in contrast to Edmund Exley and to Jack Vincent's, like the way that they are styled is really important. And I even love the styling. Sorry, this is kind of a tangent, but the styling of Lynn also where she's in her Veronica Lake persona versus when she's just like on a date with Bud, right? Where her hair's up in a ponytail and she looks like a teenager again when they're like sitting in the movie theater and stuff. It's just really great hair makeup, like that sometimes calls attention to itself, but often is just like the rest of the incredible design here, right? Like the production design is so incredible, but it's mostly kind of in the background in terms of just kind of filling out the world, but in an incredibly like thoughtful way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Ed's glasses, which are one of those things that's like, those are in movies all the time. You know, I'm thinking of Hidden Figures where she has her glasses that she keeps like pushing up, right? And it's a little character thing. But then like the fact that the other characters are actually commenting on it. Like, again, like you are an archetype within the story world, not just to the audience, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the glasses go away for a while and they're back by the end. Got the glasses back.
Symbols. Yeah, I might just piggyback on this because there's a lot of really good cinematic filmmaking in this movie that doesn't call attention to itself. And so I kind of want to, because I think that's often when it's the best, is when it's just telling the story in exactly the right way. And so, yeah, like you were saying, Alex, the staging of that first scene, just really well done. There's like expectations set up also because he calls into the headquarters like to come pick this guy up before we see what he's going to do. So like that's introducing questions and doing that kind of stuff. There are some really cool editing moments where the movie moves fast when it needs to move fast. So there's some sequences where it's almost like jump cuts where they like get to the lobby and they're going to run up the stairs and we're just sort of like they're looking through the book and now they're on the stairs and now they're in the hallway and it's moving along stuff that we don't need to see. And then there are other moments where, you know, I'm going through this house, I'm checking the different rooms and you see Bud White and he looks in a room and then the camera stays on this close-up of him for a long time. Like it doesn't reveal what he sees. He is clearly reacting. He has discovered something, but the editing is going to like withhold that information from us as long as possible. That makes us want to like lean in and know what is it. And so the editing, I think, is just really good at knowing when to be fast, when to breeze past stuff, because that's where the momentum is, when to show you exactly what you need to see. Even like you were saying, Brian, like, show me that woman in the car again with the broken nose. Okay, right. She's that person we're talking about.
Right.
So like the editing can hold your hand, or it can withhold critical information just long enough to make you really want to know. And I feel like it's rare to see a movie that has editing that's doing all of that at once so smoothly. And I feel like the cinematography is doing a lot of that at the same time. Like a lot of the shots are kind of conventional, showing you people's faces when you need to just like pay attention to the performances. But there are also some really cleverly framed shots. Trisha, you brought up at the very end, Ed's kind of confession or telling everyone about like, here's what really happened. And there's the one-way mirror, and it's a shot of him, and we're looking through the glass, but in the reflection of the glass, we can see all the politicians reacting and shifting in their chairs. And so again, it's another moment where the editing holds on this shot because we're getting so much great information about what he's saying and people's reactions and the sound design and people creaking in their chairs. And so I think this is a movie that warrants studying for just the cool filmmaking things also, because that's using all the tools in the toolbox in often not flashy ways, but in clever, really effective ways to keep the story moving, to keep us focused on what's important, and to make us want to know what's going to happen next. So,
Yeah.
Trisha, what's your lesson?
Yeah, I just want to briefly talk about Stensland and also Exley's father, who are two important characters actually for the characters, but are not in the movie very much. I think the tension that we see in the opening sequence between Bud and Stensland is really interesting, where in their dynamic, we get kind of a sense of like, this guy is drunk, he's a sloppy cop, he's probably no good at his job, he doesn't care about this woman who's getting beaten by her husband, he's really annoyed by Bud and his whole thing, But then when he goes down to like beat up those prisoners, Bud is immediately like, I'm going to save him from making a mistake, right? Like he's not actually there to save the prisoners. He's there to save Stensland from making an error. And then we get that other scene where they're like, after he gets dismissed, right? After Stensland loses his job and everything, you know, he walks him down to his car and they kind of have this conversation. And we see that there's a real relationship here. Like we maybe don't understand why, we don't necessarily need to, but we see that it's important to Bud. And that is crucial for understanding why there's this conflict, not just in like ideology, but in material conflict between him and Exley, which we kind of, again, need for the drama to be brought out throughout the rest of the movie. So I think Stensland is super important. And I think that's really like, basically you're kind of putting a very serious roadblock between him and Exley, like that's not going to be easily moved past. And then of course, you know, in the scene where they're outside the house after kind of like the first half of the midpoint thing where he says, you know, something like Stensland got what he deserved, right? And of course he was killed very violently. And it's all still sort of a raw wound. Again, it's being brought up again to bring out the conflict and bring out the drama. And it's just a smart way to do that. The other thing is that Exley's father, we hear about him right up front. And also where Exley's talking to the reporter, where he says like, oh, you know, you had this amazing, you know, father. He was a hero, right? He was a police hero kind of thing. And then he says to Dudley, I'm not going to do it the way you and my father did it, right? Like, so we understand that Exley knows something about the way that his father achieved the status of being a hero that he does not want to emulate, or at least out loud says he doesn't want to emulate. And again, there's just this, it's just good character design where it is giving us an understanding of who Exley is and why he sees the world the way that he does. And again, his starting point, but that helps us track along the journey and gets us to a very clear picture of where he arrives at the end, which is literally exactly where his father was and in exactly the same way his father got there. Even though he said that's what he didn't want at the beginning. So it brings everything full circle, having that. He's not even on the screen. He's not even in the movie. Like Exley barely talks about him, but it's kind of all there in the text where none of it's being left necessarily to us just going like, well, why does Exley care about this? It's there. It's just tell it to us.
Mm-hmm. This movie is also a good example. I talked about this in Godfather Part 2, where there's so many characters in that movie, but generally speaking, it's like, here's this thing that means something, and then 2 scenes later, here's the payoff of that thing. And then it's like, now you never need to remember that character's name again for the rest of the movie, right? And this movie is a good example of like, things happen at the right time. So Stensland is present as an idea throughout the whole movie, right? It's like, even if you don't remember really who he was, you're like, oh no, I know Bud cares about this, and I know that it like means something. Whereas Exley's father becomes a character essentially more in the final 30 minutes of the movie. He's there a little bit in like mentioned, but then the sort of Rollo Tomassi thing and everything that happens, it's like the Rollo Tomassi monologue happens, and then Jack gets killed and says Rollo Tomassi like 10 minutes later or something, right? So it's there, it's still fresh in your mind. And I think this movie is a really good example of like, and then again, if we're going to bring someone back an hour later, we're going to literally show you on screen. It's been like, we know it's been a while since you've heard that name, so here they are again, right? But for the most part, it's doing a really good job of placing people and ideas and plot points and characters kind of at the right time where it never feels like you're too far away from them.
And also earlier, Michael, you talked about the names, and you are so right about the names being so distinctive and like just odd enough. Like in my own writing, I'm always sort of searching for names that are just a little bit weird, where they kind of stick with you because it just helps. Like
Tyler Durden.
No, I mean, truly, like, yeah, it just helps to have names that are a little bit weird and especially distinct from each other, right? Jack Vincennes sounds very distinct, but nothing like Edmund Exley and nothing like Bud White.
Bud White.
Yeah,
like, that's
exactly.
why he's so mad.
Dudley Smith and Lynn Bracken and even Rollo Tomassi, right? Which becomes an amazing, like, very serious plot point. You need to remember the name of this mythical bad guy who's just really a symbol of something.
Kaiser Soze.
Becomes exactly right. You have to have a great name for that person. So just be good. Do good names.
Yeah, as soon as he explained that was like a made up name, it was like, oh, it's like Kaiser Soze. It's like it's such one of those names.
Yep.
And I'd always assumed that this book was like that James Ellroy was like one of the Chandler Leonard like crew or whatever. It's like, no, this book was written 7 years before this movie came out. I just think that like my young brain didn't quite understand that this wasn't a book from that time, which is, I think, why the names are what they are in some ways, right? Because they are sort of like trying to be evocative of a bygone era at this point.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. Lynn Bracken is just like the most 40s like femme fatale. Like it's perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Good name. Susan Lefferts.
Yep.
I just like, it's so distinct and I hate it. I hate every time people say Lefferts.
Dude, her mom lives around the corner from me. All right. Like, keep it down.
The casting of the mother is also so great.
Incredible.
Like the casting in this movie is amazing. Do good names. It's always a good lesson. Alex, what have you been watching recently?
So I've finally gotten around to watching Hacks on Max.
Yes.
And it's as good as everybody says. It's such a delight. Gene Smart is amazing. It's so great to find a new, comedy, like heartfelt comedy, dramedy show that's just like, you just want to be with these characters in this world. And it's a great world because it's Vegas, but it's like the unvarnished reality of Vegas, of like living and working in Vegas, which is a very bizarre, not normal place. It's just great. So everybody's been recommending it. I also recommend it. Go watch Hacks.
Nice. Okay. Trisha, what have you been watching recently?
Yeah, I got to go to a couple of screenings of a movie that I wrote. So I've seen. I know.
Tell us more.
I know.
What a surprise to us.
I know. Aren't you shocked? So I wrote a little Christmas movie this year called The Christmas Chain. And it is out now. It's streaming everywhere. I had a blast writing it and working on it. It is just like a little Christmas romance. There's a love triangle in it. It was also funded by the Mendez Foundation, who they raise awareness about like kidney donation. And so there's a kidney donation plot line in the movie. When you're working on something like this, you get a little bit of extra real estate from everybody when you feel like you're doing something good in the world. So, it's just a low budget movie. It was certainly like a labor of love. But there's also like a little sweetness and a little message to it, right? Like it's about what people can do in terms of organ donation and being aware about like kidney disease. And so when we were working on it, it felt good to work on it, and it feels good to be able to share it with everybody now. So I got to go to some fun screenings here in LA. And it's nice to be able to, people have been, texting me that they're watching it, like people from my parents' hometown and all this stuff. And yeah, it's really fun. It's called The Christmas Chain. So it's out now. It's on Tubi. You can watch it there for free if you can endure commercials. Otherwise, you can pay a couple bucks to rent it on Apple TV Plus or YouTube Movies or somewhere like that.
Congrats.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brian, what about you? What have you done?
Wow.
When you go to a show and the headliner plays and then they're like, now the opener. That's how I feel. Bring it back to LA Confidential. Speaking of movies I haven't seen since college, I went to a screening of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at the Egyptian Theater here in LA. Yeah. Which I saw in my existentialism in film class in college, which explains everything about me.
Yeah.
And I think I bought Existentialism for Dummies once, and like on the back of the book it was like, so you wear black T-shirts and you like that movie where guys punch each other. I was like, oh my God, How did they know who I was? I don't think I'll surprise anyone when I say, God damn, what a good movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like, it's really entertaining. It is cool as hell. It is funny. It is dripping with theme from every corner, which I did not appreciate when I saw it way back in the day. I had remembered a lot of the stuff with the central three characters, the good and the mid and the other guy, but I'd completely forgotten that it was like there was this whole Civil War subplot. There's a whole like bridge on the River Kwai sequence. And yeah, I was just like, it kind of does that like Lord of the Rings thing where you're like, what else would you want from this movie? Like, there's nothing left that movies can do that isn't here. And it just really helped, other than like, you know, it's a 60s movie. There's like a lot of weird ADR stuff or whatever, you know, like that kind of technical stuff. Otherwise, I think it holds up so well. And I've never seen A Fistful of Dollars or For a Few Dollars More. So like that is just went like to the top of my watch list.
Oh, you haven't watched them yet?
No.
Oh, I recently rewatched them. I can't wait to hear what you think.
Yes, I'm excited. And I'm also happy that they combined are about the same length as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I said to my partner, you want to watch those too? And she's like, how long are they? And I was like, you'll be pleasantly surprised. So yeah, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, hell yeah. And then for my own personal watch list, the other two in the Blondie trilogy, Man with No Name trilogy, Dollars trilogy, whatever you want to call it. It's their movies. The end.
Michael.
Cool. So there's a new Malcolm Gladwell book out. So, you know, it's that time of the year. Where
Tis the season, Trisha.
Tis the season.
For Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes. Yeah, and I've been reading it. It's called Revenge of the Tipping Point. It's kind of revisiting some of the ideas from his very first book, The Tipping Point, which became a huge bestseller and, as he alludes to, kind of regrettably popularized some ideas that maybe shouldn't have been or were misinterpreted or even like wrong. And so it's kind of cool to
like
see.
the 10,000 Hours, that kind of thing. Is that from that book?
That's a different one.
Is it? Okay.
But the broken windows idea is like the main one that he's talking about, which is sort of like, you know, in New York, it was like arrest like people for doing small crimes and that'll prevent them from doing bigger crimes. And it's like, well, that's a reductive way of looking at it that actually then went on to cause a lot of damage and is kind of an idea that's still around. So there's a little bit of like self-revisionism, which I think is cool to see. I like it when, you know, some YouTubers like Kurzgesagt occasionally release videos that were like, we were really wrong about that thing. Let's like take that down and talk about what the actual thing is. So that's cool. And it's also just kind of continuing this idea that the first one was, which is sort of like, how do ideas spread? They spread a lot like epidemics. And so it's studying different epidemics, cultural, also actual COVID, and applying it to lots of different things. And there's a section that I thought was really interesting that was kind of about tokenism. And I think that has some applications even to our storytelling when we're talking about representation. And it sort of examines like how many of a type, quote unquote, of a person do you need before they stop being a token representative of that group and just becomes an individual. And so that chapter I thought was really interesting and fascinating. It looks at a bunch of different examples, a lot of like boards of, you know, companies where it's like, we want women, so we got a woman, and now we treat this woman as woman and not an individual. How many women does it take? What percentage of a group do you have to pass the tipping point of before, for whatever reason, our brains start thinking of them as being a different category of individuals as well as that thing? So it's an interesting book. As always, I like that he's promoting this idea of like our intuition and our first thought interpretation of things is often wrong. So let's poke at it and see what's really going on, even if that makes us pretty uncomfortable. And there's some interesting, uncomfortable conclusions that come out of the book. So, Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm enjoying so far.
That reminds me, I'm also reading a book in the similar kind of genre, Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari. You mentioned the idea of ideas spreading like an epidemic. And there's a great story in that book, Nexus, about how all the stuff about witches that like caused like thousands, millions of people to die over the course of human history, a lot of it just came from like one maybe like mentally disturbed man who wrote like a crazy book about here's how you test for witches, and the like printing press enabled it to get printed and spread everywhere. and everybody's like, this is how you hunt witches. And because of like one like actually insane person writing it down, the whole world hunted witches and killed millions of women. And it's just wild. So history is wild. There's all these accidents that happen that cause just like everything to change.
I think it's the same with like someone just like wrote a book coming up with plural names for animals, and that's just like what we use now. We're like, oh, a troubling of cats or whatever. And we're just like, yeah, that's what that is now. It's like, no, just someone just like wrote a thing. Like, isn't this a funny idea? And Michael, to your point, like, I feel like there's so much inability to like accept that maybe the thing you did wasn't the right thing out there, right? So it's like, oh, how do you feel about the fact that your movie, got a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes? It's like, well, some people liked it less than others or whatever, and it's like, that's interesting to hear, but like it's like, can't you just say like, maybe I didn't do a good thing? Like it's just, why is it so hard? And then it's like, when you do hear someone say like, oh, I screwed up, it's like, thank you. It's so nice,
Well, and in the year of our Lord 2024, about to be 2025, it does seem like something we're all going to have to get better at as more and more of our lives have been written in stone on the internet, that we're going to be wrong on the internet.
Right.
Like, we're kind of the last generation that got to be wrong before the internet. But some people have been writing books for a long time, and some people, it's going to be a thing. Like, it's already a thing for a lot of people that we said some stuff we shouldn't have said a while ago, and being able to say you were wrong about it now is a good thing.
Right.
Anyway, what are your guys' New Year's resolutions?
Wait, I have a better segue. Speaking of witches, and also lots of people dying, do you want us to talk about Gladiator 2 or Wicked?
Damn.
We did it.
Wow. Well done. As we said at the beginning, our Patreon exclusive episode for next month is either going to be Gladiator 2 or Wicked. Get out the vote. Make your voice heard. Head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon, whether you're a patron or not, and you can vote, and we will talk about it. And check out all the other really cool episodes, Patreon exclusives that are there, the discount that you get from Trisha. So many great things over on the Patreon. Thank you to our patrons for supporting this show. We couldn't do it without you. We love you. It's always really fun to see the discussions on Discord. And we talk amongst ourselves about how great you guys are and how great our audience is. So I want to let you know that's how we feel also. So thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for following our fall favorites season. It's been quite a season. E.T. happened. It feels like we've been doing this forever. It's been
quite a
Labyrinth, Mulholland Drive. Yeah, it's quite a season. So we look forward to coming up with the next one. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editors, Mike Wuerth, Vicki Lewis, and the whole Nebula Studios team. I'm Michael Tugger. I'm joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. Spotify Wrapped is probably happening. It was cool last year when people sent us like their Wrapped and where we appeared. So if you want to do that, we'd like to see it. We wouldn't mind. Feel free to go ahead and do that. And we will see you guys in the next episode for either Wicked or Gladiator 2.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.